So as we kind of started to look at yesterday, which I wasn't completely anticipating, but the workaround for the problems of animation yesterday was, if you remember, even with a single object, the way these kind of programs all look for is if meshes are being moved around, they assume it's being moved by a skeleton, just because that's how characters are animated, things are animated. So yesterday, if you remember, we had to use a small little trick, which was to simply add one joint. So under the animation tab, joint tool, just clicking one, and then pick the joint, pick the mesh, and then skin, then bind skin, and we went with smooth bind. And what that meant is, since there's only one joint, it's going to move all of the vertices on the mesh. What we'll actually be looking at today is, once you start putting together chains of joints, each one has different influences over different vertexes, so it basically just becomes a deformer. So you can basically write your own deformer that matches the shape of your mesh. So in this case, for example, if I had made a second one, and let's say I wanted to make my first deformer for this guy. Actually, one of the important things to understand about, actually, if I'll pull up that image again. Yeah, that's a good one to show. So I talked a little bit about it yesterday, but in the world of like either film, game, or whatever, the way that even like how projects work, where it's not like one person does any sort of project. I mean, there's a person who does modeling, there's a person who builds a character rig, there's a person who does the animation, there's a person who does lighting, there's a person who does materials, and on and on and on, right? So again, so what happens is, there's a person generating just the kind of overall form, and this person who's in charge of, in this case, it's just usually called a character rig, is only kind of in charge of making like an interface to that mesh, right? So you have lots and lots of points you need to move around, and then based on the character, based on like what it does, they build, what looks basically like a skeleton, right? Which is then kind of handed off to somebody else. Like on these sort of things, you never really have the person who makes a skeleton is not usually the person who does it. So, because again, what you're talking about is you're controlling kind of thousands of points, but you might have like 5 inputs to it, right? So it might be like move a hand, or turn the head, that sort of thing. So it can be, it's just like a little interface. So, and yeah, so each one of these things, it also kind of represents a kind of distinct, just like hierarchy, right? So where's the kind of top of the hierarchy, and then like a subgroup, 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 right? And I mean, the easiest way to think of it is kind of like, it's like folders, right? So this would be like the top of a hierarchy, one subfolder. So if I move the top, there's that. And so on and so forth, right? So like with a character, you have like a root node, usually like somewhere like right in the torso. So if you want to move the whole character, it takes all the other joints with it, but within that you can still adjust everything else. So in this case, for instance, like if I'm making the joints, I'll just make a few. So if I just start clicking along, it makes this chain, right? With, and they kind of point in the direction, this being the kind of top of the chain and this being the bottom. And if I look in my outliner, and essentially the outliner is exactly the same thing as like in Unity when we're looking here, where it's just kind of the list of everything that's in the scene. You can see, like, okay, there at the top there's joint 2, joint 3, joint 4, joint 5, joint 6. Makes sense? So, I mean, it is exactly like folders. And then the question is, like, how do you start to control the movement of these joints? And there's kind of a couple different ways you can do it. One of them is called, there's forward kinematics and inverse kinematics. Forward kinematics, since these things are a basic hierarchy, if I wanted to say, I want this point to go here, you have to, with forward kinematics, you have to kind of start at the top of the chain, and you'd be like, all right, I'll rotate this one, then I'll rotate that one, I rotate that one, and then maybe I rotate that one. All right, so it's kind of just like a normal sort of group and subgroup type operation. What's more useful is when we start talking about inverse kinematics, which what it says is, if you think about it in terms of an arm, like, all right, if I wanted to move my hand to coffee cup, right? Like in forward kinematics, would be like, okay, rotate shoulder, rotate elbow, rotate wrist, pick up coffee. Inverse kinematics just puts a handle at the end of the chain, so you work from the end of the chain to the beginning, and you just say move handle to coffee cup. So to make that, we start with our joints, and then next to it you can see there's the IK handle tool. I'm going to click that, and I'm going to go from the end to the beginning. And you'll see now there's also this object in Windows in Maya that's IK handle 1. And when I move the handle, the joints follow. Even within that, so right now all the joints have kind of all the degrees of freedom that they want. You can also then go in, if you want to start putting limits on things, like if I pick a joint and I go into the attribute editor and scroll down to limit information, I can start to set a sort of minimum and maximum for the different rotations. So like in this example, what's actually changing is the rotate Y. So what I could say is, I can set my minimum to be -19. So I click the arrow and then turn it on, and then I say, maybe my maximum is like 50. So what that means, when I pull it, you start to get a different behavior, because you can see that one joint will never move past 50 degrees. So let's say I then wanted to build a deformer for my friend the donut. You have to kind of plan these things. So I know that I probably still want the sort of the hierarchy to be in the middle, because it's I want to be able to kind of pull things in, but still be able to go from the middle. So I'm going to go back to the joint tool, and I'm going to turn on the grid snap here. Click one here. one here, and one at the end. And then what I'm actually going to do is, because I know I want the joints to flex in to be able to move it, if they're already flat out, they won't do anything. I'm going to move these up and kind of give it like a sort of accordion shape. Yeah, so it looks kind of like that. Because you have to kind of, give it the sort of bias of the movement you want. So after I do that, I'll go ahead and put a handle on it. And in this case, now when I, not surprisingly, move the handle and it squeezes in. So I'm actually going to go ahead and well, we'll just test it like that for now. So if I now pick the skeleton, then with Shift pick the ring, and again under the animation tab, go to Skin, Bind Skin, and do a smooth bind. Well, I think I actually had the handle selected instead of the object. So now we start to deform it. So again, it's kind of taking this idea of having one input to the whole thing. So it's like, all you're doing is animating one movement, right? But it's deforming a whole mesh. Well, let's try to be fancy there. So what happens then is you start to, you have to kind of plan the relationship of the shape of your skeleton to the actual deformation you want. So this was really simple. It's only one-sided, but if I was going to say make it a little more complex, let's do it the old-fashioned way. So now, like even if I wanted to move this thing out of the way, when I pick the bottom of the skeleton, it pulls everything with it, right? So if I wanted to animate it, you can move it. You can be moving it and deforming it all at the same time. It's just to understand that this is now the controller. You can't really do anything by picking the mesh anymore. That's why the arrows go gray. So if you're going to move it, you have to do it from the skeleton. So for instance, with this guy, so in this one, I'm actually going to I'm going to switch to a front view. And again, I'm going to start it here. I said I was going to. We'll do it the same way. So I'm going to do 1 and 2, 3. And actually looking from the top. Using my grid a little bit, so I know that this one goes like 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to go back to the joint tool here, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and do 2 more. So now I've actually got these 2 different chains. I have this one and that one. So what I need to do is pick the top of the second one, then with Shift, pick that one. And I basically just want to add it or parent it to that hierarchy. So I can either do Edit, Parent, or just P as the hotkey. So you can see now this middle joint now has like 2 arms coming out, right? And we can do the same thing for the other sides. So again, go back to the joint tool. On this one I'm going to do 1, 2, 3. So then I'm going to pick that joint, pick the center joint, and parent it. So again, I just use the P hotkey. So pick it. So now the skeleton is kind of like a star, right? Just so it lets us where we can pull it from all the edges. So now I'm going to set it up by, I'm going to grab each one of those and just pull them up a little bit. And then grab the bottom joints and pull them back down, right? So like a little spider almost. And now I'm actually just going to go through and put a handle on each one of those. So go to the IK handle, pick there to there, there, to there, there, to there, there, to there. So at this point, it's still not skinned, so I pick the root of the joint of the skeleton, pick the mesh, and again I'm going to go skin, bind skin, and smooth bind it. And what that means now is, when I can kind of deform it from all sides. And the other thing that's important to understand is the way you keyframe these affects how it moves a lot. Like it almost makes them stick down, like if it knows that it's keyframe. So if I wanted these to kind of move kind of together, right? If I wanted them to all move to the middle to deform it that way, let's say I'm going to do the outliner again. So I'm going to pick all my handles, and on frame 1 I'm going to key all of them. So actually, sorry, I lied to you. So one thing that's good to do, especially with handles, is, again, if you're starting to think about having to design like looping animations, it's not the same thing as just saying move here to here, but if you have to kind of think about things as a loop, you need to be able to easily kind of get back to where like its original position, right? So there's these, you can do it by, you can kind of just write down what the translate X, translate Y, and translate Z are, so you know to like come back to that. But a nice little trick in Maya is if you just pick the object or all of the objects, you can just go under Modify and say Freeze Transformations. And with these, it gets it close. Which gets it as close as it can to kind of 0, 0, 0. So it basically just like resets its origin. So, from here on that sometimes it gets a little off like this, and you can move them, but it'll get it usually close enough. Oh. Now, it's a little bit weird because I actually didn't have it at my 0 point. I moved it, but we'll go with it. So again, if I key all of these, and then I'll do actually, I'll try something else. So we'll just do it in one direction this time. So then we're going to go to frame 80, and then move everyone in a little bit. You can see it behaves really differently than the last time. When there weren't any keys, everything kind of flew around. But by setting the key on it, it actually kind of locks in the handle's position, like rather than letting it deform everywhere. Or I say that one went a little crazy. This one may end up being the ugliest deformer in history, but impressively disgusting looking, but Oh, this was the problem. It got a little crazy because I didn't actually key the one handle at the beginning, so I'll go back and do that. I know that was fine. It's just the handle that was over there. It's a strange bubbling donut for some reason. And I'll just leave it as that one for right now. So just like yesterday, if we're going to bring this in, we have to actually bake in the animation of the joints. So the best thing to do is usually save your file before you do it. So you have like your active working file, and then you have a kind of baked file that you then export. So because once you bake it, it's a bit of a pain to go back and mess with it again. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to just save my Maya file first and call it the def donut 1. And so to bake it, you pick the skeleton and then go under Edit, Keys, and Bake Simulation, and be sure to click on the little box out here. And generally you want to have where the shapes is checked. On the hierarchy you want to have below, because what we're actually baking is the movement of all the joints and the surface. And in this case you can we'll just do it from the time slider because that's what it's on. Sample by 1 will get us what we want. The only thing, honestly, from the default settings you'll need to change is changing it from selected to below, and then we hit bake. And you can see like it just puts in like a keyframe on every frame. So what I'm going to do now is actually get rid of those, and then I'm just going to do export all. Our FBX settings are exactly the same as yesterday. Put it on the desktop, and I will call it def donut. You'll get these weird warnings of saying it's like a complex animation baked, but it's nothing to actually be worried about. So then in Unity, I'm just going to bring in that file. So just like yesterday, I'm going to import the asset from the desktop. Same thing where we're going to change it to 1. That's all fine. I'm going to add my animation. I'm going to call it deform. Yeah, or just call it def 1. It goes from 1 to 80. And I'm going to apply it. So when I play here, it's deforming, right? So one little trick. Since all I really want it to do is to go out and come back, on the animation settings, I just switched the wrap mode to ping pong instead of loop. So it basically just means play to the end, like play from the beginning to the end and from the end to the beginning, right? So if you were looking at the playhead, it would just be basically going back and forth. So you don't actually have to do both sides of it. You can just go from define point A and point B, and then just in the wrap mode, it knows go from point A to point B, point B to point A, point A to point B, point B to point A. Yeah, keeps things simple. Then obviously at this point, it's no different than what we were looking at yesterday, right? I mean, it's just like there's an object, there's an animation that has a name, you just need to trigger it. So to do that, same thing, we're just going to make our kind of dummy object that's going to collide. And if you remember, since this is going to be our kind of active colliding object, we're going to give it we're going to make it a character controller and replace it. With the donut, we're going to give it a collider, give it a sphere, make it a trigger, and then I'd already imported on this one, so just with the animation trigger basic, I'll just drag it on there. And then go into the trigger and pick the right animation. So then the only thing left to do is to turn off play automatically. So now when I hit it, it triggers the deformation, right? So I'm going to switch gears for 1 second. So we're going to build like the other one, so kind of looking at, rather than just deformation, how to add kind of interactive, how to trigger lights and everything else as well. Unfortunately, like if you can't like animate a light in Maya and bring it in, it doesn't work. It's just since it's like Maya set up for a kind of light, it's kind of like why the kind of advanced materials in Maya doesn't work. Materials for rendering are completely different than materials for like interactive or like real-time materials, so it just doesn't work. So what it means is you have to build the animation in directly within Unity, which is not such a big deal. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create, just like yesterday, I'm going to create a point light, and then since I know this one's at the origin, I'm going to go ahead and move this one there too. So just by doing 0, 0, 0. And I'm going to change its range a bit. And I'm going to move my camera. So even with this, like anything with lighting, you're already starting to get like more interesting effect of the actual object. The other things we can look at, like if you notice on the point light I showed you, you can also, if you don't want it to be white, you can pick a color by just picking the light, and then, you know, as you would pick a color for anything. I'll make mine yellow, greenish, something like that. And you can see, so it's starting to kind of glow it green. Then, you know, like the one I showed you, where if I want to be able to trigger the light on and off, you know, what we're actually going to do, instead of actually triggering it on and off, we're just going to animate the intensity, right? So if you have a light and you put the intensity to 0, that means off. Yeah. So we're just going to animate the intensity going up and down. And we do it the same way we would in Maya. So we're just going to do basically a keyframe animation of the light intensity. So to do that, you have to open the animation panel, which is under Window and then Animation. And you can see, like, it's only, like in the animation thing, it's only ever going to show you what you have selected. I mean, obviously, because like if you start to get like hundreds of objects that all have animation, it's only ever going to show what's selected. So I'm going to open up under Light, and you can see the channel intensity, right? So that's actually what I'm wanting to animate. So the first thing I do is hit this button, which is saying, you know, create a new animation for this object, right? So in the same way, like when we imported the objects from Maya, we had to say this is its animation and give it a name. So this is where we're kind of giving the animation a name so that we can access it later. So I'm going to call this light NM1. Oh, I've already done this. So we're going to call this one 2. Right? It's just because that same scene is the one that already has the lights in it. And you can tell, like, after I said you have a new animation, all these sort of channels turn to black, which means we can actually make an animation. And, you know, I'm looking at intensity, but obviously you can animate anything. Like for the point light, we can also look at, you could also, you know, and you can animate like the range of the point light, right? It'd be the same thing of like how much reach does it have. We'll just do intensity for now. So to do that, you know, we're on frame 0 and this little diamond, which is like add a keyframe. So we're going to pick intensity. So we're going to select it down here and say add a keyframe. And that keyframe is at 0. And then I'm going to go out here to like 1 second. And I'm going to change the value to say 5. So if I hit play, that's kind of what we've got, right? So, sorry, it zooms in a little bit more. You can also just do F like you would to frame it. So you see the kind of, so you can see, you know, frame 1, it's at 0. Frame 5, it's at 5. So obviously with this, we want it to, if we wanted it to repeat, like similar to all the other animations, you want to have to be like, make a really long one or anything. You want to be able to say how to repeat. You can do that in the same way. So if you just go here where it says default, you know, if I just wanted to do like the other one and just go back and forth, I could also just say ping pong, right? So switch it. So it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. And what's nice is, you know, since it's just an attribute, I can then go back and just grab this keyframe. And as I move it, it obviously adjusts the whole sequence. So it's just saying repeat this first step. So that's it. So what it needs now is the light just needs its own collider, right? So it's an object like anything else. It just needs to have its own collider so it can trigger that animation. So to do that, it's exactly the same way. Pick the point light, go into Component, Physics, and pick whatever shape collider you want. I'll do a capsule on that one. And actually, if you look now, you can see when you pick the point light, it has exactly the same type of animation tab that if we imported like a mesh from Maya or something, it's exactly the same thing. It's an object that has a kind of associated animation. Actually, before I do that, you can see now if I've hit play, it reflects the animation I made for it, right? So yeah, now I gave it a capsule collider, make it a trigger. I want to run it on the x-axis. Actually, I'll make it bigger than that, so I'll make it like 300. Yeah, 250. So the reason I did that is, you know, I look at this guy. Well, it's actually a bit too big. I know that like the collider for, you know, triggering the shape is pretty close to it, but I'm going to pull the collider out for, you know what? Hold on, it's the wrong shape. I'm actually going to make that one a sphere as well. So I'll do component, make it a sphere collider. And just pull it out. So there's the collision for the light. There's the collision for the object, which basically means you just start to be able to sequence them, right? So as something approaches, it triggers the light, triggers the light, triggers the light, and then engages, you know, the shape. So you can kind of get multiple layers of kind of different sizes of triggers all in the same thing. So then the only part that's left is on the point light, I'm going to turn off play automatically. Take the same thing, the animation trigger basic, and drag it on the point light. Then down here, pick light animation 2, because that's what we called it. And then I'm going to pull this guy back a little bit. And so now right? So trigger the light. Now trigger the deformer. Same thing going backwards, right? So it stops the deformer, light's still working. And to be honest, like the lighting like works as good as anything for any of these things, like because as soon as you start to get, you know, if you kind of model some like complex mesh out and just start to embed a bunch of lights into it and just like dealing with the shadows and stuff, is you get as good of effect as anything in actually deforming stuff, which is why I showed this. Make sense though? So then the last little part of this, like if I wanted to be able to, you know, if you wanted to just like array a bunch of them, I want to put the, you know, kind of package everything together. So all I'm going to do is just go down here to the point light and drag it on top of the object my donut. So you can see it's now within that group, right? So it's basically adding it to that group so that if I now duplicate it, yeah. All right, here I'm going to show you another little trick here too, because if you've noticed, it can be a bit of a total pain to get your camera to focus at the right spot. So I'm just going to pick one of these guys, and in your project, when you made the project, like you remember there was like the tick boxes of like include standard assets, and there was like scripts or whatever. So you can see in my standard assets thing here, I've got a scripts folder, and it's not. So actually, it's all the way down here. So under scripts, there's camera scripts. And for right now, I'm actually just going to make a second object. I'm going to make a tiny little sphere for right now. We can also make it invisible later, but and I'm going to call it like target. So under these camera scripts, there is smooth look at, and I'm just going to grab that script and drag it on top of our main camera. And when you do that and you select the camera, there's now this kind of smooth look at script at the bottom, and there's this thing called target, and there's nothing in it. So I'm going to click the little box and find the name of my object. That's why I made sure and gave it a unique name so I could find it. And now what that means is when I press play, the camera's just going to look like it basically targets wherever that sphere is. So I can set this guy up a bit. Yeah, it's a lot easier. It's just like as you would normally have like a camera and an aim. It lets you do it that way. So, it makes setting these scenes a lot easier. Setting, because you're not like doing rotation. You just make an object, say, look at that object, move the object around. So if I then wanted to change the rotation of the camera, I can pick the target and, just move the target. And okay, now that that's all there, back to the business at hand. We've got one. Move down a bit more.
So you can set that like first donut up if the sphere from the one beside it is engaging it. When that thing starts to turn,
Exactly.
it will engage the next one. Like if you change whatever the collider is, like to match, but the movement of the first sphere can engage the second sphere.
In this scenario, no. That might be possible, though. I hadn't thought about that. It should be.
So you can kind of create a chain reaction so that it.
Yeah, you might be able to do that. I hadn't thought about that, but it might be worth trying. Well, the problem is it doesn't actually, when it deforms, it doesn't actually,
Doesn't move.
it doesn't move the collider. It's still within its kind of space. So
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like if you had a different collider for the other ones that kind of floated above it. Because like, does the collider have to be centered on the object always, or could you
No,
move
you can
the
move wherever you
collider like up and over?
no, you can move the collider wherever you want. It's like on here where it's center. Right now it defaults to 0, 0, 0, which is like the center of the object, but you can move it to wherever you want. So, what else? What do I do here? So, looking at a slightly even simple object, I mean, like the one I showed, which was just like a panel. That's not true. I'll show you one more funny thing here. So the interesting thing to understand is actually the other thing I talked a little bit about it yesterday, because a lot of the stuff is like, even with simple stuff, being able to get more interesting effects out of it. Right now, it doesn't even have to be singular objects. Which also gets more important with the materials. Wait, where did you go? You can even when you're having, strange, your own clipping planes and things. It's important to remember, like a single FBX file can be as many different meshes in a file as you want. It doesn't have to be just one object. At the end of the day, it's just all visual effect in this case. It's just that's already different of clipping it than not having anything. But the other thing I want to show you is once you have the kind of handles, the first time I was just moving them myself, like, okay, just pick an XYZ, pick an XYZ. But since the handles are objects, you basically have all of the sort of other animation tools within Maya that you could use for anything. So I'm going to go back and I picked them all, and I'm just going to get rid of the keyframes this way. So I'm going to pick everything, right-click, and say Break Connections. And that basically just says, clear out all the keyframes. So in this case, instead of just moving it myself, I'm going to set up a path to tell it to follow. Right? So instead of me just like picking two places, I'm going to set up a little more clever system of being able to control it with a path or a line. So anything can be a path. It's just a curve, right? I mean, you can draw it here. You can bring it in. You can draw it in AutoCAD. You can draw it in Rhino. It doesn't really care. I'm going to draw it here. And for the first one, I'm actually just going to make a circle. And then center the circle on the joint, like where the handle is. that's not true. I'm going to move it where the circle's kind of close to. So if you've done anything with kind of, path animations before, like all you're saying is follow this line and from this frame to this frame, right? So take this many frames to go along this line. So in Maya, to do that, you just draw your curve, and I'm going to pick my actual handle, which is handle 3. So I'm going to pick the handle, and then pick the curve, and then again in the animation menu, there's a second one here. It's called animate, and there's a thing down here called motion paths. So, and then you're going to go out and attach to motion path and click on the options. So in this case, a lot of these things don't matter, but it's just like how long do you want it to take to do it? Either just do all of the time slider, or do a start and an end point. We'll just leave it at the time slider. And in other things it matters more, but it's like, what is the kind of front axis? So what is the axis that you want to actually be following, like along the kind of normal in the line? To be honest, we'll just test this one and see what it looks like. So now, when I play, it's no longer having to define the points. And the good thing with Maya is that everything's kind of dynamic and construction history based. So if you're like, all right, that doesn't really work, I'll just move it. Like I can even just move the circle over here, or move the circle wherever you want, and it updates everything else. Or maybe you want it a little higher, or you want it to go in the other axis, so you just rotate the circle. Make sense? And that's one. I mean, you could do one that way. Switch to like a front view and just draw another curve. I'm just going to draw a straight line. So I'm just going to make it a 1 degree 1 curve, which degree 1, it just means you're not going to have any smoothing. So it's going to be like sharp edges. And again, my grid snaps on, so I'm going to then just pick draw from here to say here, and then switch back to perspective. Find my curve. That one will work. So I'm then going to do the same thing. So pick that handle, pick this curve, and go again, animate, motion paths, attach to motion path. And I'll do the same thing. And right now, I mean, you have to be a little more careful than this, because there are constraints on what the skeleton can do. I haven't really planned it well, so even though the handle's moving, I didn't make it physically possible for it to do what I ask it to. So part of that is I'll move my circle here a bit. Actually, I'll rotate the circle that way. Could also, so I'm going to go back to my front. Make a second line. So again, it's better to plan it a little better than I did, but so that's one way, right? I mean, you can. The idea of these things is, you know, as you move backwards, you can actually start to set up a much more controlled system, right? You don't have to just like picking random points in space. These are kind of a nice way of you can, if you know, like, all right, this is my range of motion, you know, follow this path. It's a pretty nice way to control these things.
So if that was a multiple, like, could you pick different spots on the path, like on the motion path, and like set a keyframe so that it's faster at the beginning and or slower at the beginning and then faster at the end? Like if you're thinking like an arm, you know, when you throw a baseball, like the snap at the end is much faster, right? So if it's following that kind of motion path.
Yes, I think, how do you do that? It's there's a couple different ways you can do it, actually. I mean, there's one way where oh God, how do you do that? You can either chain a couple of paths together, or say, like, for this one, go from here to here over this rate, or go from here to here to this sort of rate. You can add that stuff in. Or there's a way you can do it with the curve too. I would have to look at it though, but yeah. So one thing I'm going to do is, again, I'm going to go back to the simple sort of surface object that I was showing yesterday, because donut deformation can be a little unpredictable. And so the other reason I'm going to do this is, you know, we're going to start from just a simple plane, but then, you know, if you want to make it a different shape, we just do it with a material, right? You don't need to model it. If you want to change its shape, you just give it a different alpha channel that cuts your material at the end of the day. Which is, again, how all this stuff works, right? I mean, they model really simple geometry, and all the detail just gets painted in as textures over the top of it. So to do that, I've got my plane on the inputs here on the polyplane. 17. I'm going to make it kind of even numbers so it matches up with my grid a little easier. So I'm going to say 18 by 10. And I'm also going to change the number of subdivisions. So obviously you can't deform it if you don't have the points, right? So this is the sort of resolution I'm going to get out of it. What am I going to do? I'll actually just keep it as a plane for right now. So what I'm going to do here is simply, actually looking at yours yesterday, just like peeling a corner, right? So how would you like peel in the same way, like kind of peel back one corner at the edge? So I'm going to make I'm going to make my skeleton. So again, I'm going to start it in the middle, because if you can imagine, like, it's going to pull towards something, so I want it to pull towards the middle. And I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3. Oh, oops. Sorry, I made too many joints. So and in the same way, I'm going to get, actually I'll pull it down this time. And obviously, I mean, the reason why you kind of put a kink in it is like if you think about it, if it's already straight and you like pull along the axis, it doesn't know to bend, right? It's like by just like making and biasing it this way, when you pull it, it's going to pull it back that way. So that's why I have to kind of make a little kink in the road. So let's see what happens. So then I'm going to make the handle. And then skin it to this thing. So skeleton, and then skin, smooth bind. Then I'm going to test this. And what I wanted to do was kind of follow the axis of this thing. So just by double clicking on the move tool, like I was on kind of world coordinates, I just switched it to the object so I can move it like along its kind of standard path. And so now when I do that, you know, it starts to pull. You know, we're kinking the whole thing. If you wanted to kind of hold down the other corners, you would do it almost like the other one, where you would then. Let's try that actually. So I'm going to save these as 2 different versions. So I'm going to call this panel V1. And then I'm going to go back to the top view. If you're not used to Maya, I'm sorry I didn't say that. Like the way I'm getting this other menu is you hold down the space bar. Okay. And I'm going to draw in a couple of other joints. So I'm going to say here and here. And in other kind of hotkey news, I'm pressing the letter Y, which means like finish the command, but do it again. So it says finish making those joints, but keep myself in the joint command. And then just like before, I'm just going to parent these together. So there to there. Oops. There. Actually, sorry, I got ahead of myself. It's really better to do this before you've attached the surface. So what I'm going to do is say detach the skin. Because the reason is like before I could move the joints around, it didn't really care. When I move the joints afterwards, it's going to be trying to deform the mesh when you're doing it. So I'm just going to pick all of these, move them down a little bit, and then pick all the end joints, and sorry, I do that one at a time. Okay, so now they're actually in the right spot, so then I can parent them together. So now I'm going to do it and bind the skin again. It's still moving kind of crazy. So I'm going to put a handle on all the other ones. So I'm going to do a handle from here to here, there, to there, there, to there. And I'm going to keyframe there, translate. Right? That, again, you needed it, and by setting the key, it like tricks the thing into basically sticking them down, right? Otherwise, it's just trying to solve for, because it has all these handles, and it's trying to always update the whole system unless they have a key, right? So they have something that's telling them where they need to be. If they don't have something that's telling them where they need to be, the kind of kinematic solver will tell them, and who knows what will happen. So with this one, at this point, just to get back down to the grid, I'm going to go back to what we just looked at a second ago. So instead of me trying to pull this thing on its own, I'm just going to give it a simple path to follow. In this case, I'm going to do that. Do it from the back view. Front view's fine. So the curve, I'm actually going to make this one degree 2. Oops. Something like that. So the problem, one little problem we're going to face here is, you can see when I pick the curve, its pivot point is actually in the middle, because I want to be able to move the curve around and rotate it. So to move its pivot point, on Windows you hit the Insert key, and when you do that, this changes over, and then you just move the pivot to wherever you want, and then you hit Insert again, turn it back off. So now, like when I select my object, it's at the right spot. So the corner, yeah, so we're actually pulling up that corner. So I'm going to take my curve, rotate it around, and do just as before. I'm going to attach it as a motion path. So yeah, it's going to be, do it this way. So animate motion paths, attach to motion path. Actually, sorry. So one thing, I forgot, I'd change files to only have 24 frames, which is going to be way too fast. So do it as 100 again. And then, if you, then when you want to start, like say you want to adjust the motion, you don't actually need to change the key. All you do is just adjust your curve. So if I pick my curve and right click and say vertex, oh. Turn that off. You know, I can just change my curve shape. Change the shape of the curve, changes the path, which updates everything. Make sense? So let's see if this will work. So I'm going to save this as panel 2. And I'm going to bake the simulation. So again, pick the skeleton and go to Edit, Keys, Bake Simulation. That's all correct. Then we bake it through. And then we're going to do, again, export all. I'm going to call this moving panel. Then here, so again, like I said before, within one project you can have kind of multiple scenes. So I'm just going to say a new scene and say save that one. We're going to call this once you do that, the scene shows up over here. So there's actually several scenes saved within the same project. So then I'm going to import. Wait. No idea what I just called that, so we'll do it again. Weird. That's not good. Oh, there it is. Right? Sorry, I got a little freaked out. It was the same color as the background.
Is there a way to change that color, either the object or the background?
Yes, the object's really easy. You can, even on the import, it does this the default. So it's basically going to take it as like the default material here. But what we're going to look at now is adding the material to it. So in like basic terms, if you just wanted to do it as, just like a simple, blend or like just normal shader, the way you do it is under your project, you just say create material. And we're going to call this basic. So in this case, this is, as you would imagine, just like your most basic material you could get. It's just a kind of diffuse shader. At the very easiest, we can just pick a color. And actually, I'll go ahead and apply it to this one. So again, you just drag it either onto the object or onto the object over here, which makes it a little easier because it updates it as you're doing it. If you wanted to have a texture map on it, again, you just pick it. You could just pick we'll get into that in just a second. So, it's obviously doing just one because I didn't give it any wrap. So again, I'm just going to tell it to go back and forth, and then apply that. It looks a bit weird because I forgot to give it thickness. If you give it a little bit of thickness, you don't lose the kind of individual bit. Actually, I'll see if I can go back and do that. It's probably going to freak out the skeleton, but so I'm going to switch to the polygons menu and say edit mesh, extrude. Just pull a little thickness up. Seems okay. So I'm just going to export this again, because that's the only thing I changed. It should be fine. I'm going to call it def panel thick. Yeah, it may not be happy with this, but we can go back and unskin it. But usually you would want to extrude the surface and then skin it. Let's see if it'll do it. So I'm going to import it here. Yeah, it wouldn't do it, sorry. So we'll go back and talk about, and I'll re-thicken it later, but we'll stick with this for first. So with this guy, I'm going to do not quite sure what just happened there. So to make our life a little easier, I'm going to do this before and make a target. And then in our standard asset scripts, take smooth look at, put that on the camera, then pick target sphere. What is happening? Oh. Since I dragged the panel into the scene instead of over, it's, as you can see, a kind of crazy location. So I'm going to bring that back down to earth a bit. Got this to be a mess. So yeah, we don't have any light. So again, right now it's just hitting that. If we, in our materials, you know, before I just did, oops, just dragged on the green. If we want to do something simple like just a transparency map on it, so it's not just a solid surface, there are a lot of things to choose from, and the way you do it is we're now under the shader. It just says diffuse. You open that, and there's lots of other choices. These are all actually pretty well documented. If you just look in the Unity manual, it talks about like each kind of built-in shader and what it does and that sort of thing. One we're going to look at is under transparent. We're going to do under transparent and the vertex lit. So there's, you know, once you switch to this, you have then your main color, your specular color, shininess, and then the main thing here is you know, picking your map that you use for your alpha channel, right? It's slightly different in Unity to do these things, because like if you've done like any sort of materials before, you normally just like make JPEGs, right? So black is transparent, white is opaque, anything in between is diffuse, right? Well, that doesn't actually work because it needs to do like figure out the alpha channel live, because like when you do it with black and white, it's actually running it through the engine. So all you do, I mean, again, it's still just a Photoshop problem. So instead of making it black and white, you basically you'll see when you make your Photoshop document, you just say it has a transparent background, and white is still opaque, but then you just kind of delete away. So if you cut stuff away and then save it as like a PNG, then it reads it in. So to do that, I'm just going to do a new. I'm going to make it a square object just because so I can tile it. So 512 by 512 is a kind of standard texture size, and say okay. And you notice, in Photoshop I said transparent background. That's why I have. Actually, I'll show you that again. Background contents transparent, and that's why you get these sort of the grid. So first things first. On my first Photoshop layer, I'm just going to paint it all white. Or actually, sorry. I'm going to make a new layer and do a fill with white. And then to cut it, yeah, I'll do it with a circle. So the ellipse marquee. And I'm going to go here and then just delete the white. So what would normally you would like, because if you were doing it for rendering, you would paint it black, and this way you just like delete the white. You could also, well, we'll do this one first. Same thing, I'll make 2, and then just delete it. So now we just need to save it in an image format that holds the alpha channel in it, and the easiest way is to do it as a PNG. So we're going to say just save as, pick PNG, and I'm going to call this whole cut 2. And on that, just stick with none. Right? So then in Unity, just like everything else, I have to bring that in as an asset into the project. So just right click and say import new asset, and pick this, which is whole cut 2. And now when we go back to our shader, when we go and we select, go under like picking the alpha channel, find the one that's called whole cut 2, and there you go. You can already see it started to. And just like anything else, like you can offset it a little bit. Like if you wanted to move this one in. Well, it's probably not enough. The other main thing, like if you want to tile it, well, let's put it 0. Go to 0. If I wanted to tile it, like 10 by. And the cool thing is, you get it live even here, right? I mean, it's. And all the sort of lights and everything treat it that way. So if it's clear, it'll shine through it. All these sorts of things. So you can model pretty simple things and just do it with a texture. That's doing it completely cut. I could also. If I took even just something like the eraser, change the opacity, it's still a little high. Because you can basically then you just use it like a paintbrush, right? You just paint, the opacity becomes your color.
So if your object wasn't like a flat surface, let's say if you was like a cube.
Mhm.
So would the texture, like the holes, would it apply to the top and all sides, and then they would intersect in the middle?
Well, it's just a surface, right? So I mean, it would be clear, and you would see the back of the other ones.
Oh, so it's not like a solid.
No, it's not a solid.
Oh, okay.
So. And no, sorry, just doing that too quickly. Actually, I wonder if the PSD would work. Sorry, bit of a test. Yeah, okay, you can actually just save it as the Photoshop file. It works too. Right, so here we've got total cut and then, slightly transparent based on how much I peeled away on the white.
Just a quick question. If you change the native Photoshop file now, do you have to basically re-import the same file, or does it automatically relink?
That's a very good question. I didn't know you could do it as a Photoshop file, so we will find out. So let's say we added another. I think then maybe if you go, what was it called? Does it do it? No. That's all right. It's saved. I would have thought so, but see, I learned all kinds of things here. So when you do it as a Photoshop file, you can do it as grayscale then. So you can say just like the alpha from grayscale. What did you learn? Surprised it doesn't. That's too bad. No, it seems it won't. And Actually, I was going to say I'll have to look and remember which one's the easiest to do with the bump map, but the bump maps work the same way. Well, I'll go over here in just a minute, but where, you know, just as you would do it for a texture, you can kind of get the bump. Anyway, I have to look this up because I forget which one's which, but so I would say for now, and like in a bit here before we have lunch, like have a look at a few of those things, and then yeah, break for lunch, and then we'll come back and start to do the, you know, try this stuff out this afternoon. So, but that should get it, you know. New deform. There's other stuff we can look at too at the deformers too, but deformers, lights, materials. It's probably enough for the morning.